Do you want your drums to hit harder, your bass to be tighter, and your leads to cut through the mix with maximum clarity? You can achieve all of that by using a transient designer. And in today's video, I'm breaking down 3 transient designer techniques that will instantly bring more clarity and definition to your tracks. We'll explore transient design on drums and bass, but I also want to show you how it could be really useful on vocals as well, an application you may not have considered before. I'll specifically be using a brand new plugin from Newfangled Audio called Articulate throughout this video to demonstrate. While there are a lot of transient designer plugins out there, Articulate stands out with some unique features that makes it worth checking out. 1. Unlike many transient designer plugins that just give you basic attack and sustain controls, Articulate has a unique 4-stage envelope that allows you to precisely control the attack, decay, sustain, and release. 2. Many transient designers limit you to their predetermined definition of the attack and sustain settings, whereas this one gives you the freedom to tailor them by using the separation slider for more precise results. With it, you get better control over exactly what's considered the attack, decay, sustain, and release before the plugin even processes it. 3. Articulate features a built-in sidechain, opening up possibilities for creative ducking or expansion effects. This is especially useful for creating better separation between competing elements in your mix, and is a personal favorite feature of mine that we'll definitely be exploring in the upcoming tutorial sections. And finally, 4. Articulate has a built-in limiter that makes sure your audio never clips, even if you really push the transients. In my experience, this is a pretty common problem, so it's great that Articulate lets you handle this right inside of the plugin instead of needing to stack another one right after it. Combine these highlights with the built-in input and output controls and meters, as well as the delta to audition exactly what you're changing, and these are just a few reasons why I like Articulate. You'll get an even better idea of what I mean as we use it throughout the rest of this video. Before we get started, if you want to check out Articulate for yourself, I'm going to leave links to it down in the description below where you can do a free 14-day trial or even purchase it if you're interested. But let's begin by using a transient designer to sculpt our low end. We'll specifically look at managing the relationship between a kick and bass in our session as you see here. As you may know, it's very common for these two sounds to clash and get in the way of each other. And in the context of this mix, you can see that the kick is a pretty rapid, quick-hitting sound that's really driving the rhythm of the track. On the opposite end, you can see the bass on top is a more elongated, sustained sound that plays throughout, ultimately filling in the gaps when the kick isn't hitting. Although, of course, they do overlap in the mix at times, as you can tell. Therefore, logically, if I were to assign these two sounds roles from an ADSR type of perspective, it would be that the kick is functioning as the attack and the bass is the sustain during those moments where they play together. With this in mind, we can use Articulate or whatever transient designer we have access to reduce the attack on the bass in order to create room when it plays. And while we could technically do this perpetually or statically as you see here, we could specifically use one of Articulate's standout features being its built-in sidechain. This will make the process more dynamic by only affecting the bass when the kick is playing simultaneously and otherwise leaving it untouched, ideally making the sound more transparent in the process. So to begin this process, we're going to put an instance of Articulate on the sound that we want to be secondary, which is going to be the bass in this case. And then from there, we're going to want to route the sidechain input to receive signal from the sound that we want to dominate, which is going to be the kick in this case. I'm also going to need to enable the sidechain setting in this case to make it recognize that input. Before we do anything else, I want to make sure that Articulate properly focuses on the attack during this process. So to best do this, I'm going to actually solo the attack setting, which is another helpful feature of this plugin, how you could solo and mute any of the ADSR settings available. And then I'm going to play the track and adjust the separation slider. As I do this, you're going to hear that it alters what exactly is perceived as the attack, as well as the other settings listed. As I move to the right with a more focused setting, it'll isolate the attack, decay, sustain, and release a little bit better or more accurately, but it may produce some artifacts at the same time. On the opposite end, as I move towards the smooth setting, it might adjust the boundaries of these and allow them to blend into each other a little bit more, which may sound a bit more natural and smooth, but at the same time at the expense of being less precise. Ultimately, I want to just play this and be able to isolate the attack as best as I can, so let's adjust this setting first and then talk next steps. So I've landed here at 30%, which seems to perfectly isolate the attack in a more natural way without producing some of the artifacts or that extreme focus that comes with a higher setting. With our attack now better isolated, we can now move into the next step of this process, which is going to be to bring down the attack slider, which will ultimately reduce the presence of the attack or that initial hit of the bass and make room for the kick at the same time. The exact amount you should bring this down by is totally up to you, but I'd recommend starting with a setting of at least -2 or 3 dB, or even potentially as much as -10 dB or greater depending on the situation. situation. So I'll unmute my kick, I'll bring the slider back up to 0, we're going to play this and see what setting seems to feel best. And now this seems to sound better, creating a room for the kick's attack where it's crucial, but without completely losing the bass as the sustain and release settings have been left untouched. You can also hear exactly what we were losing when I switched into the delta, which is pretty noticeable when I have this in isolation, but when I put everything together, you don't really notice it. Now, as a final step, I do want to just take a look at the overall input and output levels because we are losing a little bit of volume in this process, so I may want to adjust the output level just a bit in order to better match the level before we started this process. Now, it's not perfectly gain matched, but it's a lot closer than it initially was. Now, you may be wondering why use a transient designer with a sidechain over another process like sidechain compression. After all, sidechain compression also ducks the sound in a similar fashion. The key difference is that a sidechain compressor will reduce the overall level of a sound when another sound is present. On the other hand, using a transient designer with a sidechain functionality like Articulate will be much more precise, allowing you to duck only the attack or duck a specific aspect of the ADSR rather than the whole level of a signal as a compressor would. For example, while I really focused on adjusting the attack in this situation, I could technically get even more focused and allow it to affect the attack and decay, or even the attack and release only while preserving the decay and sustain, allowing for a lot more creative opportunities that really aren't possible with the sidechain compressor alone. What's also cool is we aren't just limited to ducking with Articulate, we can actually apply expansion as well. So in this case, I can actually have the attack duck when the kick plays, but then I can actually increase the sustain so that way when the kick hits, the sustain of the bass comes up and gets increased. Check it out. Really, this just allows for a lot of unique creative possibilities, but I want to keep it focused on a surgical move here because this is the most common way that I use transient design in my own mixes. But now let's explore another situation where I'd use a transient designer, this time on vocals. And we're specifically going to explore two different situations where I'd use a transient designer specifically, so consider this two tutorials in this one section. The first is going to be to use a transient designer to treat plosives, those boomy P, B, G, T, and K type of sounds that sound like an excessive buildup of low end. Let me actually just mute my lead performance and play the plosive so you can hear exactly what I'm referring to. So I've obviously isolated those specific plosive moments, and I want to treat them on a separate track in this case. What I want to do is load up an instance of our transient designer on this plosive track. Now, because we've already isolated the plosives, as you can tell, I'm actually going to bring the separation slider all the way down to smooth. From there, I'm going to play the track and then bring down our attack setting until it smooths out the excessive presence of the plosives. Let me reset this and give it a try.
Cold. Cold mind, but my heart stay warm like a sweater. Where I'm going, there's no telling. Stepping out is pain that I used to dwell in. Cold mind, but my heart stay warm like a sweater. Where I'm going, there's no telling. Stepping out this pain that I used to dwell in. Cold mind, but my heart stayed warm like a sweater. Where I'm going, there's no telling. Stepping out this pain that I used to dwell in. Stepping out this pain that I used to dwell in. Stepping out this pain that I used to dwell in.
So it's really interesting how simple yet effective this process is, especially when I bypass this and put it in. You can really hear a difference in the presence of those plosives. With a setting of almost minus 15 dB, it sounds a lot smoother, but of course without totally suffocating those plosives either, because we do still need them to function in the mix. But now let's take a look at another way that I use transient design on vocals, which in this case is going to be for some subtle dynamic smoothing. While this isn't a full-on replacement for compression, we can use a transient designer to apply gentle, broad adjustments to the attack, decay, sustain, and release, which can lead to a more controlled feel and shape within the dynamics, but without the excessive level reduction that sometimes happens with compression. Really, this will just adjust the general articulation of the vocal, and I do think it's handy to stack this with compression as well, but check out how I apply it in this case. I've already got an instance of Articulate loaded onto my vocal here, and I've already adjusted some of these settings. As you can see, I'm reducing the attack in particular to make the entry of the vocal a little bit smoother. At the same time, I'm enhancing the actual meat and potatoes, the main part of the vocal, which is really the punch and the body, adding about 1 dB to both, which is just enhancing its presence a little bit. And then at the same time, I am reducing the release or the air setting by about minus 5 dB. This is helping reduce any sort of lingering resonances that are taking place within the vocal itself. Each of these are also very focused, as you can tell, because I have a high separation setting, and I'll quickly play through solo each one and then also show you the before and after. And what you're going to hear is that the vocal sounds slightly smoother, but also just a bit more present at the same time. Check it out.
If there's some high, low around, we don't know. If there's some high, there's low around, we don't know. If there's some high, there's some lows around, we don't know. If there's some high, there's some lows around, no. If there's some high, there's some lows around, we don't know. If you're here, I'll let you watch. If there's some high, there's some lows around, we don't know. If you're here, I'll let you watch. If there's some high, there's some lows around, we don't know. If you're here, I'll let you watch. If there's some high, there's some lows around, we don't know. If you're here, I'll let you watch.
Overall, it's a pretty subtle adjustment, but it is definitely tightening things up and enhancing the presence at the same time, smoothing the entry and exit of the vocal and really enhancing the most important aspects of it at the same time. I think this is actually a really cool way to pre-process a vocal before going into a compression stage, since it gives you so much control over exactly how it's being articulated. So if you haven't tried a technique like this before, I definitely recommend you experiment with it in your own sessions. But let's take a look at another situation where I'd use a transient designer in my mix, which is to enhance the dynamics of drums and percussion sounds. Most drum sounds, such as the kick, snare, and closed hi-hat, are generally quick, transient focused sounds with a strong attack and less sustain. This is clearly exemplified on screen. You can see all of these hits being a kick, a snare, and a hi-hat. They're all very quick and do not linger for very long. Because of this natural character, I usually use a transient designer to further enhance their attack and reduce their sustain, resulting in a more defined and punchy drum sound that accentuates their transient nature. Now in this example, I've applied an instance of Articulate to all 3 tracks, and my goal within each instance was to achieve the following. 1, slightly increase the smack of the kick, the snare, and the hi-hat by increasing the attack across all 3. 2, on the kick and snare in particular, I wanted to slightly increase the punch by increasing the decay setting. You can see I've added 1 dB on the kick and about 1 dB on the snare as well. And then 3, I wanted to slightly decrease any lingering resonance by reducing the sustain and release across all 3 sounds. You can see with the kick, I'm taking both down by about -2. On the snare, I'm taking it down by 8.5. And then on the hi-hat, I'm taking it down uniquely by -3 on the sustain and -8 on the release. These changes as a whole, as you're about to hear, are going to be producing a quicker, snappier sound across these 3 drum sounds. Check it out for yourself. Very quickly, you can hear how much more defined the drums become as a result of this process. Some sounds, like the kick for example, feel a lot less boxy or flabby for lack of a better word, due to the reduction of the sustain and release in particular. Similarly, both the kick and the snare feel a lot snappier thanks to the increased attack and decay settings, really front-loading that initial snap of each sound, for example. And finally, the hi-hat also feels a bit more dynamic and groovy as a result of these settings as well, mostly due to the fact that we're increasing the attack of it, but then also reducing how long it lingers with the sustain and release settings. And it's important to note that some of these changes is actually causing these tracks to clip. So for example, with the snare, if I go into the articulate instance I have there and remove the limiter, you're going to see this sound is now going to be clipping a bit. However, when I put the limiter on, it's going to prevent that clipping from taking place, ultimately keeping everything in check, which is one of the main benefits of this limiter in particular. Overall, this is my typical process when using a transient designer on drums in particular. And again, that's identifying what their specific role in a mix is, and then enhancing or reducing aspects of the ADSR to better complement them in that role. But this is where I get curious to hear from you watching. How do you use a transient designer in a mix? Please share your responses down in the comments below to help me and your fellow mixers out there. And of course, if you want to check out Articulate for yourself, once again, you can do a free 14-day trial via the links that I'm leaving down in the description below. If you got value out of the video, please give it a like as it really helps this channel reach more people. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing so you can see some more mixing and mastering content like this in the future. Speaking of other content, I'm going to leave some other videos on screen for you to watch next, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next one. Peace.
5